Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of What's Next with We. This episode is part of the innovation series, and wherein we cover various topics across innovation and figure out what's next in that space. Today, we have a really interesting guest from the US, Robyn Bolton. Robyn, welcome to What's Next with We.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Awesome. Robyn is a founder at Mile Zero. Obviously, we'll get to know more about her work that she does for large corporates in this podcast. I'm Vishal Ramaswamy, your host as always, the V in What's Next with V. Robyn, jumping right in, I believe you've had a pretty illustrative career. I would say quite an envious one for many. You graduated in marketing, then topped it up with an MBA from Harvard, and then worked at pretty prestigious corporates from PNG to
Yep.
BCG, and then Innosight as well. So it would be good to hear your experience both on the academic front and the professional front. Maybe just a quick overview to the listeners would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I've essentially spent my whole career in innovation. Like you said, on the corporate side, I worked at Procter and Gamble and was part of their innovation teams and launched the Swiffer brand, which is now a $1 billion brand.
Yeah.
So have that experience in big corporate, also worked in consulting, at Innosight, which is Clay Christensen's firm. And then on the academic side, went to undergraduate, got my, this is kind of before innovation was really a
True.
discipline and a topic. So majored in marketing, but then went to Harvard Business School for my MBA. And now I teach and a master's of design innovation program. So I also look at things from that academic viewpoint, and really the goal of everything I do is taking the best of academia and theory and making it practical, because that's the world we live in, so
True.
that companies get results from their innovation efforts.
Awesome, Robyn. I think full circle, I would say you started learning at grad school and obviously topped it up with an MBA, had a lot of corporate experience in the innovation space, and then now you're coming
Mhm.
back to teaching, right? Robyn, just
Yep.
going into my next, I'm sure you mentioned this before that you had worked in your first project at P&G. Would be good to maybe pick your brain on the innovation experience you've had, maybe highlighting few case studies in in the in the corporates you were at. Some highlights would be
Yep.
great to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, my first experience, as I mentioned, straight out of university working on Swiffer, and it was at a time when P&G was still relatively kind of new at innovation. And so we were figuring a lot of things out, concepts we take for granted now, like design thinking or lean startup, didn't exist back
Yep.
in the days of creating Swiffer. Um, so so we were figuring that out, and certain truths kind of last the test of time. And so the idea of what we did around being really customer centric and consumer centric and spending a lot of time with consumers, understanding what their pain points are, um, observing them do things, in this case, cleaning their floors, but like, how did they clean their floors? What were the
Mm,
tools they were using? What did they like about them? What didn't they like about them? And, you know, always grounding in consumers. The other thing that we did, which, again, is the truth, is the constant experimentation.
mm. Yeah.
We had lots of small experiments testing various parts of Swiffer. Then we had a big test market where we tried things out all before we launched. So in a lot of ways, we were a startup. We were very
Mm,
entrepreneurial. We broke a lot of rules. We challenged a lot of processes at P&G, and P&G, like many big companies, has processes. They have structures, and they're there for a reason. But when you're trying to do something new, they get in the way. So we just kind of plowed right through those. Um, and those experiences, those learnings have carried on through the work that I've done as a consultant and as an advisor. And, really working with clients from across a whole range of industries to like, help them be consumer focused. One of the things that happens a lot, especially in companies that are very engineering driven or technology driven, is you come up with this amazing thing, like you develop an amazing solution or an amazing technology, and then you just put it out there. And it's like, okay, well, if it's not solving a problem, if it's not resolving a pain point, it's not going to get traction. And that's
Good.
really hard when you've created something amazing for it to go into the market and kind of fall flat. So I work a lot with companies on, okay, you've got something amazing. Now let's go find the market that has a pain that this solves instead of just throwing it out there.
Got it. I like the what you had mentioned. It was like a startup, like the Swiffer example that you gave. It's like a startup inside a large organization like PNG, right? So that's a pretty good experience. I think having the backup or the support of a large company and you building a new brand internally, I
Mm-hmm.
think this falls under the entrepreneurship, right? I think it's as good
Yes.
as starting your own startup. So I think that's a brilliant example of how you can kind of use innovation in creating a new business line for a large company, right? Pretty awesome,
Yep.
Robyn. Just wanted to pick your brain on your other experience at InnoSight. I think, as you
Yep.
mentioned, you were partner there, and it's Clayton Christensen. I think he's the father of disruptive innovation. So it would be good to
Yes.
hear your experience there. I think for the listeners out here in India, I'm sure a lot of people know about him here in India. So it would be good to
Mhm.
hear your experience at InnoSight.
Yeah, no, it was an amazing experience, especially to, be so close to that, the father of
Yeah.
disruptive innovation. And one of the biggest things I learned and I think the most important things I learned was the theory of jobs to be done.
Correct. Yeah.
And, that jobs are a problem people have or progress they want to make. And that if you can find their jobs to be done, you can understand their motivation. And thinking about that, not just in the functional sense, but also emotional and social jobs to be done. And one of the things that I learned um, from him and at that firm was that it really is the emotional and social jobs that drive our behavior. So, as I say to a lot of my clients, we're human. Even when we go to work, we remain human.
Yeah.
And as humans, we decide with our hearts and we justify with our heads. So it's really the emotional and social jobs to be done that are driving our behavior. And we're looking and talking about functional jobs to kind of justify what we've
Mm.
really already decided in our hearts. And seeing that play out time and again in working with big companies and even in how CEOs, CFOs make decisions has been remarkable. If I can share a story, quick story,
Yes,
um,
absolutely.
we, we were working with a big medical device company, and they were developing a surgical robot. So we were talking to customers of their competitors. There was already a surgical robot on the market, and so we were talking to people who had that. We were talking to a CFO of in the US, a regional health system. So pretty small. They only had 2 hospitals. And the small hospital system had bought a surgical robot, which is millions of dollars. And we said, oh, kind of what's the break even point? What's the financial case to be made? Because we're talking to the CFO. He said, we have to do 400, I'm making the numbers up, but we have to do 400 surgeries a year to break even. I'm like, wow, that's a lot of surgeries for a hospital of that size. And he's like, yep. And we've bought a second one. Like,
Mm.
wow,
Okay.
how many surgeries are you doing? He said, 200 surgeries. And again, I studied marketing. I didn't study anything math related, but I was like, 200 is half of 400.
Yes.
Um, so as CFO, how did you justify this huge expense? And he admitted, he's like, I was so popular when we got the first robot. All the surgeons loved me. And I went from being this person that everyone avoided to this person that everybody wanted to be friends with. And I loved that feeling. And so seeing like an emotional and social jobs like that influence multi-million dollar decisions by a CFO, it just reinforced how powerful, jobs to be done, and especially understanding emotional social ones are.
No, I think I think, Robin, very important point. We typically overlook that, especially when we
Mhm.
talk about innovation and we talk about latest technology. We typically move away from being human, right? The emotional and the social
Yeah.
aspects that you were talking about. I think if we can incorporate those aspects as well, then actually you're actually unlocking a lot of value for all the stakeholders involved, right? So I think that's a really interesting story, right? And how the CFO felt like a lot of team
Yeah.
members coming in, and that kind of influenced him to take buying more. Wow, that's pretty great lesson to be learned. I think, as you said, um, these things typically gets overlooked, and good that you're bringing it
Mhm.
that to the main focus point. Robin, coming to my next question is on your journey, right? I think you've had over
Yeah.
20 years in the innovation space, worked with multiple large corporates, being at the corporate and being also on the at the consultant point of view. And now I think you're running Mile Zero for over five odd
Mhm.
years. So
Yeah.
would be good to hear your experience as an entrepreneur starting out at Mile Zero, and would also like to know your the work that you do for large customers through Mile Zero.
Yep. So the work I do at Mile Zero is working with leaders of, you know, usually businesses kind of 100 million and up, to help them use innovation to get results. And one of the things I've learned through my career is we focus on the process and structures and governance and all of these, kind of left brain sort of tangible businessy things. And yes, those are all important. Those are all necessary, but they're not sufficient to be successful with innovation. That innovation at its heart, it's not an idea problem, it's a leadership problem. And so, in order to get innovation to work at an organization, leaders need to be very involved. They need to um, often make decisions that their peers might think are crazy, um, and it's really challenging. So I work with leaders both on the architecture, those processes and structures, but also on their behaviors and how they need to interact with the team, and then how to build a culture. So, as I call it, the ABCs of innovation, and kind of further reinforcing my, um, you know, my learnings through my career, the importance of acknowledging the human aspect is reinforced by my journey as a founder, as the founder of Mile Zero, because I always kind of looked at entrepreneurship and said, you know, I know it's hard, I know all the statistics, but there have been so many books written. There have been, so many amazing podcasts, so many articles. Like, why is this hard? You know exactly what to do. And
Right.
then I did it. And I was like, oh, the hard part, you're right. All the things you need to do, the architecture you need to set up, you have to experiment your way there to figure out what to do. But the incredibly hard part is managing yourself, and the emotions that go with
Yeah.
the ups and downs and the uncertainty of entrepreneurship, how you show up and interact with the people on your team. Even if you don't have employees, you still probably have a lawyer and an accountant, you
Yeah,
know
absolutely. Yeah.
vendors that help you. So how you manage yourself and how you manage the people around you is so critical, and oftentimes that's the most challenging aspect of being a founder. Is what you need to do. Like, you need to set up the bank accounts, and you need to
Yeah.
have a lawyer review the contracts, but the emotion that goes with it is really challenging.
A very critical point that you mentioned, Robert. 10, it's just, I think 12 years back, I set up my first startup, and it was in the edtech space. And I
Mm-hmm.
did that for 2 years. And exactly what you said, right? The most challenging part was actually managing myself the
Mhm.
emotions that you go through, because you see that your peers or friends are maybe doing their master degree, they're going abroad, maybe setting up businesses there and already raise money. So you're kind of comparing between your peers. So that kind of comes in, and then ups and downs. There are more downs than ups. So it's how
Yep.
you kind of conduct when you are down. I think that's very critical. But that has kind of helped me build my character, my attitude,
Mhm.
and kind of helped me where I am right now. So nothing else can teach you more than entrepreneurship. So awesome to hear that, Robyn. Just wanted to get your experience. I know you're mostly have worked with large US based organizations. I think you've had a brief stint in Europe as well. Just would
Mhm.
like to get your thoughts. Maybe most of my listeners are in the in this part of the world, so the Asian part
Yep.
of the world. So it would be good to hear your maybe thoughts, message to CXOs, leaders of large corporates on this side, on how they can kind of navigate innovation.
Yeah. I think CXOs, in India and in that region have such an incredible opportunity. I see in a lot of ways the entrepreneurial spirit that, you know, kind of typified the US in, the 90s, the
Yeah.
early 2000s. You think of Silicon Valley. I see that more and more
Yeah.
in India and in that region of really kind of the center of true like entrepreneurship and exploration and
True.
all of the messiness and the impact
Yeah.
that brings. And I think especially with AI, I mean, AI is the hot topic, I think, everywhere.
True.
I think with the incredible talent in India and the entrepreneurial spirit, it just seems like a perfect time and place for CEOs, CFOs, COOs, all the CXOs, to really empower folks in their organization um, to be curious, to run experiments, to try things out, to really envision what's next and create for that, because it just feels like we are on the brink of an entirely new world with AI, and tapping into it, exploring it's just going to yield huge benefits. And so it very much seems like there's a huge opportunity for, I'd say, especially folks in India and in that region where there is such a strong entrepreneurial spirit at this point.
Yeah, true that, Robin. Also, I see it. I'm based out of Bangalore. I see a lot of folks just graduating from college and kind of starting out their own ventures, obviously across sectors, from technology to non-technology based startups as well. But you're right. I think the culture of entrepreneurship has kind of finally kicked in, and it is
Mhm.
taken as normal now, and the society kind of respects it. Maybe not 10 years back. 10 years back when I
Yeah.
started out, the society used to look down upon, saying that what are you doing, why don't you uh, maybe join a large company and kind of work your way through. But now I think there's a drastic change in societal kind of attitude as well. There's society
Mhm.
also backing such folks to start your own startup. So you're totally right. I think there's the right time in India, especially I would say not only India, the Asia as a whole. I think we're
Yeah.
seeing a lot of innovation happening across. So thanks, Robin. Thanks for your thoughts there. Um, I think moving on to my kind of my last question,
Yeah.
and which is basically the theme of my podcast. You just mentioned what's next, so I'm just kind of going to double click on that and pick
Yep.
your brain on the last question, which is the theme once again. What's next, right? So I want to maybe kind of ask you in two aspects. One is what's next for Mile Zero. That is one,
Mhm.
and what's next in the innovation space, especially the corporate innovation space? How do you see that evolve in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah. So for mile zero, what's next is continuing to kind of bring the message of the ABCs, and especially the role of leaders in innovation, out to corporates, because there's still a very strong sense, understandably, of like, if I just put the right structure in place, all my innovation dreams will come true. And it's like, well, no. You have to show up as a leader, and you have to do very specific things. So there's that. And then also, like I mentioned, AI, it's such a huge topic. It's everyone's trying to figure it out, and mile zero is as well. So figuring out, how can we, mile zero use AI to be more effective and better serve clients, but then also how can we advise and help our clients to figure out what their strategy is when it comes to the combination of AI and innovation. So that's for mile zero. I'd say, bigger out there in terms of innovation for big companies. Again, AI, huge topic. Companies are really struggling to figure that out. And there's a huge risk of shiny object syndrome, of whatever the latest, AI thing. And like, even the fact that I'm saying AI, like it's all one thing,
Right.
it's not true. We need a better language about AI, but there's the shiny objects, and companies tend to race after that, and kind of taking the pause to say, essentially, what are your jobs to be done? What are you trying to solve for? What are the pain
Yep.
points? Now with that focus, and even the beginning, that kernel of strategy, then let's go find the right thing. I think the other thing that's happening on innovation separate from AI is that companies are starting to be more disciplined about their innovation shiny objects. For a while it was, what is late design thinking, and everybody rushed after that. And then it's like, go set up your own lab, and everybody rushed after that. Then it was like, set up a corporate venture capital, and everybody did that. And I think there's such fatigue around innovation and kind of this activity-based pursuit that doesn't yield results. The companies are finally saying, what, we don't want innovation, we want the results of it. We want growth. We want to stay ahead of competition. So how do you do, and kind of having that purposeful design?
Awesome. I think well put, Robin. I think, as you said, AI is the shiny thing out there. Everybody's chasing it. I think, as you said, that jobs to be done, right? I think once you have that set in stone, once you know what problem you want to kind of solve, it could be AI, it could be any other technology, right? As you
Yeah.
mentioned. And I think the other part that you mentioned, that, for example, large corporates need to have that ABC, I think pretty much sorted. I think that's the foundation. I think that's pretty critical. I think without that, once leaders get into the day-to-day rigor of the business, typically they kind of lose focus of innovation. If you have
Yeah.
a good structure already in place, and the rigor and cadences that's required to kind of run innovation for long term, I think that's super critical. And I think, as you mentioned, the jobs to be done. Robin, one last question, I think, before we
Yeah.
leave. With also, I've had limited experience in innovation, and I mean, through my experience, also dabbled with internal and external innovation.
Oh.
What I've seen is, more often than not, the innovation kind of projects or initiatives kind of dies in its own, in due course, if there's no revenue angle, if there's no business opportunity um, in that innovation project or initiative. Would like to get your thoughts there. Should innovation be kind of linked to revenue, or should it have a business outcome? Should we look at outcome focused innovation? So would like to get your thoughts there.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a great question. And it's honestly one that I've struggled with, uh, because my instinct is, yes, if you can't, show the revenue, if you can't show the profit you're creating, you're always at risk. Because as a
Yep.
leader, you have finite resources. You only have, you know, so much in your budget. You only have so many people. And the challenge that leaders face is that, they know, if I spend this much on the current business, this is my ROI. This is when I will realize that ROI. What happens. You spend that on innovation, you don't know. You may get nothing back. And if you get something, you don't know when you'll get something. So, for, if I put myself in leaders' shoes, and I have a lot of empathy for leaders, I understand why they take the sherbet and invest in the core business. And as you said, innovation slowly, or maybe quickly, kind of just dies. Um, So it's a real problem. I think it's the biggest challenge that leaders face. And the best solution to that is, well, then produce revenue or cut costs, like put dollars against it.
Mm.
I have, however, there's exceptions to every rule, seen exceptions to this. And one of them is Adobe Kickbox, which is a program that Adobe created that essentially put everything an entrepreneur needed to, create, pursue, experiment with an idea. They put it all in one box. And you could sign up, you'd get your box, and the box contained everything, as I said, everything you needed, and including a $1,000 gift card that you could use for anything. You didn't have to submit your receipts, you didn't have to show what you used it on. It was just yours. And so you can imagine, like, the cost of this program is at least $1,000 a box, and
Yeah.
they gave away hundreds.
Okay.
And you look at the projects that came out of Kickbox, I think they have a few that generated revenue, but certainly not enough that I would say would break even. But it's still looked at as a huge success because it helped change the culture at Adobe. So, do you have to put dollars to innovation to help it survive? No, but I would say you have to be very clear up front of what success looks like for what you're working on. And if there are no dollars or rupees or euros or whatever attached to it, it needs to have the backing of a really, really, really senior executive to keep it alive.
Perfect points, Robyn. I think, yeah, I've experienced the same as you said. I think there has to be an outcome driven mindset. As you said, the success
Mhm.
criteria have to be decided upfront, otherwise, kind of has its slow death. But I think that Adobe Kickbox that you mentioned, it's a pretty interesting program. I think creating entrepreneurs inside a large organization kind of one obviously creates maybe interesting products, but I think at the same time that, as you mentioned, the culture at the
Mhm.
core kind of changes. So I think that's a pretty cool example. On that note, Robyn, thanks a lot for sharing such insights. I think in this part of the world, we don't get such kind of rich experience, especially in corporate innovation, because corporate innovation is pretty new in this part of the world. It's not still become mainstream. It was good to hear your experience across different organizations and obviously what you do at Mile Zero. I mean, would love to have you in India sometime, Robyn. Would be awesome to host you. So, on that note,
Yes.
Robyn, thanks a lot for being part of What's Next with We, and would love to have you once whenever you plan your trip to India.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And like I said, there's so much opportunity. I feel like you and India in general are just, you're at the very beginning of a really exciting adventure.